Sponsored this week by Avocado Property. This week, a little bit different. We have a listener turned investor on as a guest, Blair Rogers, who started off life as an electrician working for the NHS, invested in property locally and has gone further afield to Doncaster as a result of our North versus South podcast a year or 18 months ago. So to find out Blair's plans, Blair's wins, Blair's losses, and what he plans to do next, listen up.
So Blair, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, good stuff. Looking forward to getting stuck in. As we kind of said on the intro, yourself as a landlord, someone that's come into property, and now you kind of, it sounds like talking off camera, you've got a bit of a bug for it as well, which is great to hear.
Yeah, this particularly last few weeks, there's been a lot of moving parts where sort of detracting from focusing solely on, my own job to actually, wanting to grow the portfolio a bit more and spend more time on myself and, growing something for my family, really.
Is that a big part of the reason you've kind of looked at property and moving away from the electrician aspect of things and more thinking, right, property, I've got a skill set, but I've also got a goal that I want to work towards here, kind of a future sort of longer term plan, I think. Is that something that's a big driver, would you say, for you?
It is, yeah. So I've always, I bought my first rental property at 22. It was always the plan was to have rental properties kind of as an extra pension, because what I do pay into a pension, you can't really get access to it until later in life. So I'd be quite keen to try and retire early. So it was always the plan. I think my dad kind of instilled that a bit. So he was originally a carpenter from a trade background. So property's always kind of been discussed in the household and always been kind of in the background. So yeah, I say it's always been the plan as a kind of second backup pension to let me retire early, really. That's always been the plan. But I've always focused on work. So, started out as an electrician in the NHS, so apprenticeship. And then, whilst on, at the side, buying properties and, working on them, doing them up and getting them. Particularly the first few I've actually lived in. So the first one actually I got at 20, lived in it. And then that, building the equity up in that. Gave us the ability to buy the second one, and then after that we lived in that one and did the same again. So it's kind of buy and refurbish, but whilst living in it as well and letting the capital growth naturally happen at the same time. So yeah, let to buy mortgages have been a big help in slowly building it. But primarily my work, so starting as an electrician, went into management pretty early and have progressed from there. So it's office sort of management stuff I do now. Asset management, but that's helped with understanding buildings, understanding how to maintain them, sort of leases and things like that as well. So I've been able to use work to benefit me personally as well.
A lot of agents follow the same sort of process, don't you? You buy the rundown property low, then you kind of live there for 2 years or whatever it may be, and then you kind of upsize, and that's quite a common thing for
I think
for
it's
us.
Having an understanding either of how property works or how houses are built puts you in that place where if you buy the shitty one on the street, that there's 100k to be made for doing some hard graft or putting some time in or some planning or something like that, which exactly what estate agents will do. I think I've bought 2 repossessions and 2 messy divorces in my time because they're the ones that kind of attract me, like glutton for punishment and all that, because it's a difficult purchase and all that kind of thing. But I think rarely does someone in the industry buy a vanilla kind of newish house, do they?
Did you, with your first property when you were 22, was that bought with the intention of to move in it, you were buying it cheap because you knew you could do the work, or was it always the case, I'm going to buy this from an investing perspective?
Yeah, so the first one was a flat in Essex at 20, and that was, my home, that was me moving out. But even that, when I was looking, it was always had to be near a train station, had to be able to get into London, because that, I knew that's where the capital appreciation would be and where guaranteed you'd rent it out. So even then, it was, I wanted to be my home, I wanted to, look nice and, and put the work in. But it was always just going to be temporary with the view of then, turn it into a rental. And then a couple of years later, I suppose got a bit lucky with the area grew quite quickly in capital appreciation. So was able to do take some of that out and then buy a specific buy to let sort of the next town along. And then from there, a few more years later, got with my wife now, and then we were able to sort of pull resources together and then buy the next home, live in that, keep my places, and kind of just grow from there really. So, and again that one. So when me and my wife, when we bought the house in Essex that we lived in, again it was always what's the area, of course at that time we're then looking at schools, knowing a bit more. So it's not just about the train station, so as time's gone on, understanding actually what different factors affects, being able to rent the property and the capital piece as well. I'm actually more focused sort of now on the rental side still. I'm not, because of, I suppose the capital appreciation takes time, and I'm keen to kind of grow and make sure the money's coming in, as opposed to relying on sort of waiting for time to build up that value. So
is that because your goals have changed from thinking right, a pension plan is about capital appreciation, and thinking right, what's the equity going to be in this property when I'm looking at some version of retirement, whereas now you're thinking I really want this to just be my total full-time gig. So you've also got the element of now being able to wanting to pay for a lifestyle and bills, etc. So you're now looking at the rent and the yield and the profit on the monthly kind of cost versus income effectively. Is that why that mind shift has changed a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. And the long term. So we've got a baby now, and I'm thinking about leaving stuff for the future. So, and my family background as well, it was that, I suppose, working trade mindset of, well, you don't want too much debt, work hard, pay off your mortgage, they can't take your house away. Well, that's kind of changed. I've realised that actually, to grow, debt is a useful tool. So that's something I've kind of learned myself, as opposed to, having kind of advice from, family on that, and, growing through work and things like that. You kind of just learn that actually where I want to take this to is, growing a portfolio. We've started a limited company now last year, so we'll be growing in that vehicle as opposed to in our own names, because of our rules and regulations have changed. So, I want to be able to leave something long term that, can continue to grow. So, it's more focused on, rental income, yields, and growth areas. So, picking the right locations that, will do well long term, not just, short, quick, bang for your buck and move on.
What was the big driving force for you with the limited business setup and kind of deciding to take that route?
So I'm fortunate enough, the job I've got does put me in I'm a higher earner, so I pay a lot of tax. So what that does mean is that any property we own in our names just doesn't, benefit us, to be honest. We're in the sort of basically getting hit 60% really, by the time you work everything out. So if we were to carry on growing, it had to be a limited company, to be honest. And they keep going, don't they? Legislation keeps sort of changing, moving the goalposts for landlords, and it seems that, reading between the lines, that it looks like it's going to benefit people more. If you do want a big portfolio, that if you're a corporation, you'll be able to survive, I think. It looks like they're trying to sort of squeeze out private landlords, people that are having one or two. I understand why, because corporations and limited companies, you take it more seriously, it's your job. Whereas I have seen firsthand some bad landlords that won't spend the money on property, won't do the maintenance, and expect the tenants to live in really poor conditions. Actually, the property we bought in Doncaster, I'd put in that category. So we're already spending a bit of money in there to replace the windows, get new windows in, get the place performing better thermally, for the tenant. And this is all earlier than sort of the EPC rules that will come in and kind of force that anyway. But I think, if you're taking it seriously and looking to grow and do this long term, I think, it needs to be a limited company vehicle, really.
So you move from, I guess I would define it as like hard-working amateur, which is what most landlords are. You make some money, you don't spend it, you invest it into a property, or you play the housing ladder, similar to to myself. I bought my first property. It's slightly repossession, slightly smaller than I needed it, which allowed me to buy another one the next year. Which you did that kind of let to buy game. I feel like let to buy is dead now. Very hard compared to where it was 10 years ago when it was, I'd say it was really in fashion. To professional landlord now, was there a trigger that made you want to do that? Go from, owning maybe sort of 2-3 local properties, because there's a wild stat which is like 90% of landlords own properties within 3 miles of their home, to limited company, South Yorkshire. I don't know how far that is from your house in Suffolk, but it's probably quite a drive.
Yeah, about a 4-hour drive. And so getting on to that. So initially, I'm from Essex, and, the place I lived was 10 minutes from my family home. So all of, the first 3 properties were all within 15-20 minute drive of each other. And then we decided to move to Suffolk just because, you get more for your money, better quality of life, in our opinion. We're not that fussed about the hustle and bustle kind of city life. It was easy for us to get into London, and we used to, spend quite a bit of time in there. But actually we wanted, a quieter, more peaceful life. So we moved to Suffolk, but, looking around where we live now in Suffolk and, back into Essex, like you say, that kind of let to buy, or even just general, turnkey buy to lets, ours are still, making money, but not much with current interest rates. And it's just to go and just buy somewhere that's already easily able to be let out, already have a tenant in situ. There's not much in it, there's quite a lot of risk, because if you haven't done your due diligence and, you haven't realised that there's a few bits of work need doing, all of a sudden those profits aren't going to come for a few years, based on the margins at the moment. So it was actually, I think it was the podcast, the kind of a north versus south one that you guys did, that got me thinking about Doncaster, because I've been
apparently the South lost.
Yeah.
On behalf of the South, I'm sorry about that. I think I was actually on the South team. So anyway,
I still wanted to be within driving distance, so that if anything went wrong, I know I could go and sort it out myself. But being able to adapt to, I haven't got the time. The job I've got now is intense, and so I still have a good work-life balance. But a lot of that spare time now is dealt managing with the stuff we've already got. But I'm still looking to grow, and so it's now trying to be a bit more hands-off. So having a management company look after the stuff that's not within sort of easy driving distance. But Doncaster gave me the ability to, I can still get out very early, drive there in the morning, do a day's work and drive back if I have to. If there's a particular property problem it's going to be cheaper for me to solve than a management company, because found the skills and the knowledge of management companies can be quite varying. So the company we bought the property off, we stuck with because there was already a tenant in situ, but we're now looking to move to Red Roots, who are the guys actually that were on your podcast and who I've been working a bit with in the background the last few weeks as well. So we're looking to move to them to manage the property. They definitely have a lot more knowledge on buildings and the work side of things. So things like, if you're dealing with damp or just quality of workmanship. I feel, that this property we've bought in Doncaster hasn't had any property TLC, and I understand that, a lot of landlords don't have the ability to invest into their properties because, they're trying to squeeze every penny of profit they can. But I think it harms, the long term.
Yeah.
By doing that, you put the cheap kitchen in, you put the cheap, the bathroom's been done, very cheaply, to be honest, and that will need redoing again probably in 5 years. And so, I've already factored that in. But, that's what I found with these guys, Red Roots, that we're looking to move to is, they definitely appear to be looking at sort of, medium quality work. They're not going for the most expensive stuff. But, when they talk about figures, the work I do, primarily is kind of hospital and healthcare, property management, estates, hard FM stuff. But when we're talking about the kind of work that needs doing, it's definitely aligned. Whereas the previous managing agent, they were coming out with figures that just didn't marry up with the actual work that needed doing, or their solutions to stuff were different. The kind of the final nail in the coffin was there was a tree growing out of a wall that needs removing before it damages the wall, and then it ended up being an issue. So they were going to quote 300 quid. This tree is, I don't know, the thickness of a small Coke can, and probably about 1.5 meters long. It's very small, tiny little thing, you know, half-hour job to get rid of it. We were quoted £300, so I rung around Checker Trade and managed to get a guy to do the exact same work for £25. You know, so it's still being a bit hands-on and knowing, you know, what I know, and you know, and being able to know what work is worth taking a chance on, say a Checker Trade builder or a Checker Trade worker versus, you know, putting a trust in the managing agent. And it was kind of the final nail in the coffin for, you know, these guys don't really understand the work that needs to be done. They're just trusting, you know, the emails from their contractors. And so, you know, after, you know, speaking to Red Roots and looking at some of the, you know, the properties they've got and some of the work they're doing, and got some estimates and stuff from them as well for some work, looking at an auction property last week. And, you know, it marries up definitely, you know, with my knowledge and experience. So there's a bit more trust there to, you know, take a chance on them.
It's always been my frustration with property managers is property managers get employed because it's a customer service role, but they don't understand whether it's the value of a pound or what something costs. It tends to be, I'll get a quote, I'll fire the quote over, rather than I'll get a quote, review the quote, and then either send it back with interest, or send it on to my landlord saying I'm pretty happy with this. I think they'll do a good job on it. I got quoted £95 a square metre to tile my floor the other day, and my instant response was, "Is he turning up in a Lamborghini or what?" Because they're metre square tiles. It's like, so to put a tile down, I'm paying £95, which is 50% more than the tiles cost, I think, which is just wild. Because it literally the quote had just been passed on without any kind of thought, and it just blows my mind sometimes. It's a property manager should be there to almost just sense check something. And I know we know those guys really, really well. Obviously they've been guests on here and we've met them a few times, and they're in a unique position where one of the two business partners is a tradie. So even if he's not doing the work, nothing's getting past them. Because they know the value of a pound when it comes, and how something's actually put together as well. So if someone provides a quote, they're gonna look at it and go, well, no, that's not how it goes. You don't do that, because you're gonna have a problem later on down the line, which you're reliant on that for 3-4 hours away. I imagine the novelty would drive off. Visiting on your own at some point.
I mean, you know, it's just emerging. Because, you know, I'm now looking further afield as well, because it's kind of building your confidence as well, isn't it? You know, it started from small and now it's actually, you've got one in Doncaster, it's working well, a few little problems, but, you know, everything, you know, based on the numbers we've done at the beginning, we're still comfortably within that. You know, we've not spent what we put aside for, you know, for maintenance and things that we thought we might need to do at the beginning. So, you know, we're still spending a bit in there doing a few upgrades and stuff. So, you know, actually, it's worked quite well, the hands off. The bits that I've not been comfortable with the managing agent, I've been managed to solve myself. So actually, if you can go even wider afield, you know, it's just being comfortable, being hands off, which I've found a bit of a struggle.
Is that something that as you've scaled, you've gone, actually, there's a lot of moving parts here. I'm still doing my employed role. Plus, like you mentioned, the changes to a lot of the legislation that's come in. Is there an element of security as well, of thinking, actually, there's a lot of changes to all of the laws and things going on, and it does feel like they're really trying to make it quite tricky for landlords to keep up to date with those. But actually having a managing agent that you know and can trust gives you a bit of peace of mind as well. You can go to sleep at night going, actually, someone's looking after a bit of stuff for me. Obviously, you're paying for that service, but it's quite helpful knowing that that's on the table as well. Was that a big sort of part of it?
Yeah, definitely. And it gives you the ability to switch off for periods, doesn't it? You know, having a managing agent means it's not you getting a phone call at 3 a.m. when there's a leak, which, you know, is disruptive. So, there's definitely pros. I still manage the properties in Essex myself. So it's just the Doncaster one that's got a managing agent. I know the building so well, and, you know, installed everything pretty much myself. So I'm pretty comfortable with the, you know, the workmanship, and I can still, it's only an hour and a half from where I live, so I can still get there pretty quickly. And I've got good trades access for Essex because it's where I grew up. So I've got friends and years of work and stuff that I've got access to all sorts of contractors if I needed them, whereas I haven't got that knowledge when it's remote. So that's why you put a bit more trust in the estate agent, so in the managing agent. So I think, yeah, when you're hands off, you've got to put more trust in a managing agent to take on those, deal with the work, deal with the trades, and get you that value for money, because you can't do it yourself.
And talk to me about the sourcing side of things. You mentioned briefly that that's kind of the next phase within what you're looking to do as well, is sourcing stuff. Is that specifically for your company, or is that for other investors as well?
Well, it kind of grew from, I'm looking all the time at property anyway. I just enjoy doing it, which makes it help so it doesn't feel like a burden.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm spending all the hours, all of the time looking at properties. It's not just Rightmove, it's, been to Doncaster multiple times, looking at properties there, putting in the effort, looking at the council's local plans, doing all of the research into the areas, development, doing the analysis on, the rental yields of the area, how much the property is going for, how much does work cost in those areas. I'm putting all that work in for basically every property I'm looking at and got an eye on. And, my own situation is, we've kind of used all our cash on the last property, so we haven't got any cash now. So it's going to take a while to build that cash deposit back up, although I am exploring second charge mortgages at the moment. But what it means is I'm putting all this work in, and actually someone else could benefit off it. And if I get, a small percentage on that by, packaging it up and giving it to someone else so they can invest in the property, because someone's buying it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
If it's not me, someone else is, so I might as well be involved in that process.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, what I'm looking to do is, I'm putting the time and effort into all of these kind of properties I look at anyway. And a lot of the time, you are finding turnkey buy to lets, or things that only need 5-10 grand doing on them to spruce them up and get them easily rented out. But for me personally, I want to sort of explore more refurbishment and get the money back out to grow and do the next one. But actually, if you're looking for a pension pot, something that you can just put the money in, leave the money in, and then come look at it again in 10-20 years, there's lots of those, particularly in that area. You're finding it less, I think, in Suffolk and Essex. You are having to put the work in, I think, in properties in Suffolk and Essex, and, look to HMOs or service accommodation to kind of really extract that money back out of those properties and make them work for you. But, turnkey buy-to-lets, I'm finding the more north you go, they're definitely still there and good opportunities for people. And I'm finding them, but they're just not what I want right now, but they definitely would do other people a good turn if they want, little pension pots for the future.
Yeah, we discussed it a couple of weeks ago, didn't we? We said, how do you build an income from buy-to-let with only a small start? And we figured out that you could do it and I couldn't, because of practical, hands-on, physical, ability to be able to do work. And like you said, that's where you've got the advantage, where you can go in, you're physically looking for those harder work properties to make them work harder, whereas a lot of people won't. They'll just, whether it's their annual bonus, whether it's inheritance, whether it's a bit of equity out of their own home to make it work harder. People like the me's of this world need something where it needs 10 grand spending. Right, I'll pay a contractor to do that, rather than, it needs bringing back to brick, at which point I'm out. To be completely honest, it's not for me at all, especially on a buy-to-let. I'm interested to know what a good deal looks like to you as someone in the market looking to buy. How do you assess it, and what are your measurements?
Yeah, so I suppose the key stats is that get thrown around is yield and return on investment, isn't it? But it's, I think it's properly calculating those. So factoring in all costs, where, I've been and done this multiple times now. I know how much these things actually cost, how much legal fees really are, how much mortgage fees really are. Obviously lucky enough to have the background where I know how much the maintenance costs can really be, how much actual assets, things like boilers, things like that will cost, if they fail, or when you can work out when they're likely going to fail as well. So, they're the key metrics is working out, properties with good yield. Again, trying to find anything above kind of 7.5%, 8%. And then return on investment, again, anything above 10%. But it's the actual calculations and the effort going into working out those true values, as opposed to just finding a quick calculator online and, letting it tell you what you want to see. Because I I see it a lot. I'm on a few mailing lists for a few estate agents, and they give you their figures, so they do it all helpfully for you, and they give you, what the rent will be, what the future value of the property will be, and those ROI and yield figures. And, I sit and because I know, some of the areas, I know already that they're off, or they're not quite, and, a few £1,000s is the difference between, if you're doing turnkey stuff, is the difference between you earning profit in year one or not, the way interest rates are at the moment. So yeah, I'd say they're kind of the key metrics I'm using. Again, it's the effort looking at the area. So is it, is government spending a lot of money on the area? Is it getting improved transport links? Is it spending money on businesses? Is it building new office blocks? Is it building more residential areas nearby? Are there housing developers, moving in because, they get access to much better information than I do. So if you can see that they're, spending money there and everyone's spending money in the area, it's going to go. And obviously Doncaster is, absolutely one of those. You look at their local plan, you look at, the changes that they're making in that space. There's a few risks in the area you've got to be aware of, flooding, mining, so you've got to know what locations in Doncaster to, look at. And again, in Essex and Suffolk particularly, is a lot of flat lands, a lot of fields. So you're not going to go and buy just in any village. You've got to buy kind of on the edges of the cities, up towards Norwich or, edges of Ipswich or getting into Ipswich, Colchester. They're the growing, any kind of train line into London is, things are going to, get money spent on them.
Yeah, Doncaster's an interesting one, I guess, where you were looking at those yields, what your version of the yields, where you're looking to try and hit those 7.5, 8. It's quite tough to do that, London and the home counties. It's quite tough to find those these days. But when you're calculating it, and like you say, you're looking at something that you're going to have to put an additional 42 grand in, for example, it's how you then calculate the total package for you effectively as well is really key. And sort of back on the sourcing side of things, it's a bit of a funny phrase, isn't it? You kind of get a bit of a negative sort of connotation with sourcing and property investing, and it's kind of, you sort of feel like someone's just trying to make a quick buck for not really doing anything other than sort of scrolling through Rightmove a little bit. But what you're talking about there is the due diligence that you're doing for one property in an area where there might be 100 options or 100 opportunities. You're kind of thinking, well, look, if another 2 or 3 people can benefit from the research I've done, I've secured what I need. They might have a slightly different requirement, but this knowledge is available for them. This research is available. And that's really what you're selling in that stage, isn't it? I would imagine.
Yeah, this is, I'm not looking to make quick money. I've got a job, I'm happy. I'm just looking to grow my portfolio, but I'm doing the work, putting the effort in. Someone might as well benefit out of it. If I can make a little bit of money out of that on the side, great. If not, the work goes in the bin and someone's already, someone else is going in and buying it. Do you know what I mean? What I find, most of the things I'm finding locally to where I live and, further afield is, once you start going north, turnkey buy-to-lets are still, profitable. But further south, you're having to put the work in, refurbish, or, do HMO, service accommodation, really. I think turnkey buy-to-lets, although ours are still making money, it's, if you did have a few things go wrong, you're going to lose a year's profit, if you're not careful. So it's knowing how to use that's what I'm finding, is I'm finding the property, ruling it out for my own what I need, but actually there's still 2 or 3 other routes you could go with it to still make money, but it's just not, what I want, because I want something, a bit quicker, I suppose, so that I can grow a bit quicker. But yeah, that's effectively what, I'm looking to do is, grow the network. And if there are people that are interested, can have a chat and you can share with them what I've got. And if it's not of interest to them, well, no harm done, because it won't be going anywhere anyway. So
yeah, it's fair enough. I mean, I find the journey for most property investors are kind of the way that you started it, the way that we discussed, where you buy a bit of a refurb, you live in it, and then you got a bit of equity and you kind of scale. And then you find people feel, okay, well, maybe I'll get 1 or 2 buy-to-lets from a pension perspective, and they kind of sort of sandbank those. They don't make crazy money monthly, but they pay for themselves and the tenant pays the mortgage off, and you're in a position with, when you come to retire, a nice cash pot effectively in equity. But then they kind of get into it and the bug, and then they start to do what you're doing now, which is more the refurb element of things and actually seeing that there's money to be made in property. Then there's a couple of next steps that people end up going into. So I'm just interested to know what the future kind of looks like for you. You mentioned HMOs, you mentioned conversions and stuff like that. With your connections, is there other opportunities that you're quite intrigued by at the moment?
Yeah, definitely scale. So it's, we're not cash rich in terms of got, money for deposit and stuff. So I think I mentioned earlier, looking at second charge mortgages that will release some equity money to, go and buy something. So we're looking at that right now at the moment. But I think, longer term, it will be, looking at commercial properties and converting them, into apartments, or, that's definitely, I think, an interest. But you either got to have good investors behind you with the cash, or you've got to have the cash yourself. So that's where, I think I can see it going, is just, in size and scale. Because the actual complexities, the background I've got, the work I do, maintaining hospitals, when you can maintain those, there's not really, converting, offices into flats isn't too much of a hardship, to be honest. So, but it's just, we're still small at the moment and looking to grow, really, comparatively. So I can see that's where it'll end up going. I think serviced accommodation looks interesting. I've not got any experience in it. The numbers are quite easy to pull together and work out the profit in it. But I'm a little bit hesitant. If I was to do that, I'd want it to be close to home. I've looked at a few properties nearby to where we live, because if we could do it, we can then deal with the, again, you're relying so much on cleaners, particularly, to do a good job and turn up when they need to. I know, you can have contracts and stuff in place where, you can have recourse, but ultimately you want, when you go down the service accommodation route, we use Airbnb and stuff ourselves for holidays. So, I know what I would expect when I go away, and actually it's you're relying a lot on others to make sure that service is there for every booking. But it's definitely something we're exploring at the moment. But again, that would be close to where we live. I think I wouldn't be able to take a chance on something like that further afield.
Service accommodation feels like quite hands-on-y.
Yeah.
It feels like you've got to be full-time in that gig, really, to be at the drop of a hat, kind of available to go and do something. Airbnb, the odd thing you can do here and there, unless you're doing that as a full-time profession as well, because then it's who are your teams around you. But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, just it's off topic slightly, but like maintaining hospitals since COVID, is that like a totally different gig now?
From a ventilation perspective, definitely. Yeah. It's I'd say the rules haven't really changed. I'd say ventilation's the main one that's kind of had some key changes and a lot of lessons learned and stuff. So, rules around it, guidance around it is a bit more different. I suppose everyone kind of recognises in the industry that, infection control is, top of the agenda. I mean, anyone in that background anyway knows this, but yeah, it's, like I say, I started as an electrician in NHS and progressed from there, into management very early, in early mid-20s really, and grew from there. So it's always been, and even the NHS, they have lots of houses and stuff, nursing accommodation. Yeah. So again, that all helped with dealing with houses, because the maintenance for houses is different, to a hospital. But, when something goes wrong at a hospital, it's, on a larger scale, larger problem than what it would be in a house. But really, it's not much different in terms of how you fix it. So I've been able to use that to, benefit in my own life as well.
Because the commercial side of things we've looked at, we're in the process of buying a commercial building. I was quite surprised when we took one of our contacts around there actually to look at the commercial fit out. But one of the things that he was quite dominantly talking about was the ventilation aspect of things and how important that is. And I think it's a good opportunity for residential landlords to move into the commercial side of things as well. You were going to say something, Mike, but that was quite interesting that you mentioned that in the hospitals, because it's definitely something that I've not heard mentioned previously too much, but obviously now it's quite a dominant factor.
Yeah, it just comes onto your consciousness, doesn't it? I guess, depending on what part you're in, because in residential properties it's not a thing at all, but it's the big thing in providing office suites and accommodation and that kind of thing for people working. I guess my question overall is where does this go in like 5 to 10 years? Are you gonna burn yourself out working full time and then working full time on your properties, or is this a transition thing, or is this still a kind of backseat additional revenue, time in the market rather than on the market kind of play?
I think it will be 10 years before I'm able to walk away from my job. I think, unfortunately, life's got more expensive, from starting this, when I was sort of 20 to now, got married, had a child, bigger house, bigger mortgage, interest rates have all gone up. A lot of costs there that weren't there before. So, dependent on the job until, I can grow the portfolio enough that it's earning enough to step away from that. And then, all of that time will go straight into the company, to grow it exponentially from there is the plan. But, I'm lucky. I've got, a good network of people already, particularly on the financial side, good accountants, good mortgage advisors, across different spectrums, which I didn't realise at the beginning, which, and they help me keep on top of all the finance side of things. So, they reach out to me when things are, coming up for renewal, 3 months in advance and stuff. So the moment the banks let you go and, remortgage with them, I'm, getting emails and notified of that stuff. So a lot of it I am able to delegate. But again, so, the mortgage advisor I use for the stuff in the personal name is different to the one for the limited company. And now there's a new individual I'm working with for this second charge mortgage and, bridging loans and things like that. So, been lucky that I've sort of picked up people along the way over the years that actually support instead of just, taking your money and waiting for you to reach out to them. They're actively keeping an eye on, their remit in the background.
Yeah, contacts is just
specialists as well. Yeah, that's the key, isn't it? Not your employed mortgage broker at your local estate agents who's just processing transactions and kind of selling something to you. I think specialists is the main thing to take from that. And the other thing I've kind of got from it is something that we've learned in business, having come from working for big companies to running our own business, is don't be afraid to sort of chat to other people to do what you do, because those people aren't in competition with you. They're actually trying to do the same thing as you, but the world's such a massive place, you're never going to run into them and lose something to them or them to you. So you can get that support from people and with the whole sort of sharing of deals kind of situation, just because it doesn't work for you doesn't mean it will work for someone else, because everyone's on a slightly different plan. I was brought up in work actively being told everyone else was the enemy. And the minute we started our own limited company, we found that turns out that no one else is your enemy. Everyone just wants you to actually get on with it a little bit and help out. So it's interesting to hear sort of from the landlord's point of view that it's the same thing when you're willing to stick your head up and kind of publicise it, isn't it?
And were you looking with the limited business, and obviously you mentioned about having the baby as well, was there an element of looking at building that business out to a point of having a company that is potentially able to be passed down in the next generation, and looking at kind of trusts and different ways of doing it? Was a strategic move in sort of the foundations of how you set that up with that in mind a little bit as well?
There was, yeah, actually. I think these podcasts help a bit because you guys go into a lot of detail on some of that, and so I've picked up on some of those topics, then gone away, done my own research, and ended up again dealing with an accountant, and we talked things through when we were structuring the company. The way we went in the end is, I think they kind of call it like alphabet shares or whatever. You have different tiers of shares, so that's what we've done. We've not gone down the trust route, but we're also not decided on future kids and things like that. So I kind of want family to kind of be finished and know where we are with that, and then relook at it all again. But you've got to really think long term about everything. I think it's quite important. Wills, lasting power of attorney, kind of all these different elements that you've got to, because whilst you're doing stuff now, like I say, now I've got a little boy, I want to make sure that he'll be able to retain control and inherit as much as possible out of all of this, if I'm not around and my wife's not around. So yeah, it's definitely at the forefront. But again, you know, talking to experts and getting their advice, not just. It's good to do your own research. You know, I've spent a lot of hours, you know, doing research, you know, into those topics. But you know, it gives you the ability to ask the educated questions as opposed to, you know, answering them yourself. You know, that's how I've found has been a good way to do that.
Yeah, love that. I mean, I love the fact that you've listened to the podcast and there's been some great advice that you've taken from it as well. You know, that's great for us. It means that we know at least someone's listening when we're putting all of this effort in. That's great to hear. And it's nice to see the journey of how it's unfolded. And for people that want to get in contact with you from the sourcing element of things to share that knowledge, what's the best kind of method of communication? Do they follow you on LinkedIn or WhatsApp, email?
Yeah, so the company's got a LinkedIn and a Facebook page. So Rogers Rental Properties Limited, and you can, you know, easily Google and find us on those.
Yeah, awesome. So people can check you out there. And yeah, like I say, thanks for listening. Thanks for being a guest coming on. Some really good, insightful stuff that people will take away from there as well. And yeah, I'm sure maybe in a year or two's time, it'd be great to have you back on, see how things have evolved from there as well. And yeah, keep listening to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, brilliant. Thanks for having me.